Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad. Tehami. Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden have exchanged congratulatory messages on the 45th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between the two countries. According to the Foreign Ministry of China's statement, President Xi Jinping said, let me quote it, I'm willing to work with President Biden to continue to steer and navigate the China-US relations for the benefit of China and the US and the two peoples, and to promote the cause of the world peace and development. Likewise, President Xi Jinping further has said that the establishment of China-US diplomatic ties is a major event in the history of China-US relations and international relations. History has proven that mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation is the right way for the two countries to get along. Also, according to the Chinese state media, President Biden, for his part, has said he's committed to manage the bilateral ties in a responsible way and continue to promote the US-China relationship. Likewise, we have seen a statement that has come from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson in regard to the 45th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the US and China, who has said, let me quote, for China and the US, one country's success is an opportunity for the other. We can help each other succeed and prosper together, unquote. He has also said China's US policy is consistent and clear, based on mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation. The spokesperson in that particular statement has also highlighted the two leaders reached over 20 deliverables at the summit meeting in San Francisco and fostered a future-oriented San Francisco vision which points the way forward for the bilateral relationship. In today's program, we are just going to take the stock of the bilateral relationship, particularly in the year 2023 between the US and China, what had been the major developments and incidents as far as this bilateral relationship is concerned. Also, we are going to take up a discussion, the major takeaways when the meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden happened, that lasted for 4 hours rather. And also we are going to talk about what could be the possible trajectory in the coming year, especially given the fact that presidential elections in the United States of America are due in 2024, and how significant are these messages on the 45th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between the US and China. To take the analysis on all these important aspects, we are honored to have been joined by an esteemed panel of guests today in the show. In the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Fazal Rehman, Executive Director at Pakistan Council in China. Dr. Fazal Rehman, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Also on Skype at the same time, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Talat Shabbir. He is Director, China-Pakistan Study Center, Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Dr. Shabbir, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also on Skype, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Farah, Foreign Affairs expert. Dr. Naz, thank you very much for your time, also for joining in at Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Okay, let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Fazal Rehman. Now, just by taking the stock of how this particular bilateral relationship has been specifically in the year 2023, especially when we talk about that incident that happened in the US, when the US fired down the balloon, accusing it of being a spy balloon, which was of course called by China as being the weather balloon. So after that particular incident, what had been the trajectory of this bilateral relationship between the two?
Actually, we see that in the last 50 years, the relationship between China and US has been experiencing ups and downs. But at the same time, I think the interdependence kept increasing on each other, and the stakes of both the countries in international system for the management, for the governance of international system has also increased over the years. China is a rising power and United States is a status quo power. So this is kind of a sort of competition between a rising power and a status quo power. So all the actions taken by China have been seen as hostile by the US in larger term. And all the actions taken by the US have been seen by China as they are trying to contain China or trying to hedge China in order to sort of
has it only been seen by China as the U.S. trying to contain China,
well,
or was it the stated policy of the Biden administration?
Well,
or not?
if you go by the sort of national strategic documents of the U.S., you will find sort of all the references to these things, that China is kind of a threat to their interest, their global interest. So which means that so whatever they are trying to do, especially in terms of establishing Quad, in terms of sort of developing their Asia Pacific strategy, developing sort of different kind of mini alliances. So all these points towards containment of China, and the Chinese sort of are concerned about it, and they would like to have a good normal relationship with the US, and they have time and again reiterated their position that the world is large enough to accommodate the two big powers. So which means that sort of they are willing throughout in the past also and at the moment also to have a very good working relationship with the US, so that the global problems can be solved by these two major stakeholders.
Right. Let me go to Dr. Farah. Dr. Farah, what's your understanding as far as that particular incident of firing down that particular balloon in the US airspace by the US authorities, accusing it of being a spy balloon, while being clearly rejected by the Chinese side, saying it was just a weather balloon. Perhaps this particular issue was blown out of proportion as far as the understanding of the US authorities in regard to that was concerned. From that particular incident till that particular summit between President Xi Jinping as well as President Joe Biden that lasted for 4 hours, the time period in between these two events, how do you look at that? And do you think that particular incident of firing down that balloon brought the bilateral relationship to the lowest ebb, and then there was a thaw when it came to that particular bilateral summit between the two presidents in November?
Thank you very much. It's a very valid question that if we assess and analyze the bilateral relationship between China and the United States, they, I think, are very strong trading partners. And if we look into the Chinese policy, they believe in economic cooperation with all countries, irrespective of which part of the world they belong to. So if we look at the China and United States partnership, they are having trade relationship with one another, and even in 2023 China has been the third largest trading partner with the United States. So that kind of indicate that China has always been in terms of having and establishing good relationship with the United States, because it believes in economic cooperation, economic partnership, and benefiting from one another in terms of economic deals and arrangements. But when it comes to, as our guest was also mentioning, that there was this China containment policy that was coming up, there is no second thought about that. The United States has always considered China as a threat to its existence and challenging the existing unipolar world system that we are living in today. But I think there is now realization in the international system where we cannot neglect the economic power and the emerging economic power of China. But when I talk about that, can we take China based on its economic power to
do you think this particular threat that you mentioned that the US actually perceives from the rising China, is it just because of the economy, or from that economic front, the kind of rise China have had on that particular front, or are there certain other factors that actually make the US authorities feel threatened?
Well, currently, if we look at, is it only the economic power of China that is kind of posing a challenge to the United States? To a certain extent, yes. But when we look into challenging the global status quo, China has to meet all the contours of power that include diplomatic partnership with all countries concerned, particularly the world powerful countries, through which China is now actively engaged in establishing good relationship with all countries based on the diplomatic relationship with countries, particularly the powerful ones. And then in terms of that, China also has to look into its military capabilities, its technology, and all those sectors of power. So at the moment, I think America is under immense pressure from the Chinese side in terms of its economic, the present of the world. And second threat that they can perceive at this stage is the diplomatic power and the diplomatic relationship that China is trying to establish with all countries. The way they bring Iran and Saudi Arabia closer, that was a potential threat. Probably this is the reason that we can see a heated kind of conflict happening in Israel and in Gaza, and we can see it is having a stronger impact on the entire Middle East and posing a serious threat to the United States, being siding with the Israeli as their strongest ally. So we can see that China plays a very important role when it comes to challenging the existing world order and the status quo. And we can see if when it comes to United States, of course, China is posing a serious threat. And if China stands along with the other powerful countries like Russia, probably the impact will be much more stronger. So yes, the threat is real, the threat is genuine, but to reach to that level, China still has to go a long way. It's not that easy at this stage.
Right. We're joined by Dr. Shabbir on Skype also. Dr. Shabbir, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. How do you look at how this bilateral relationship between China and the US has fared, particularly in the year 2023? What were the major turning points as far as this bilateral relationship is concerned in this particular year?
Thank you, Jawad. Thank you very much for having me. I think when we describe China-US relationship, and particularly in 2023, we see, like you mentioned in your intro, and other honorable panelists also mentioned about the balloon issue. But these there are issues. But I look at this problem. I look at this relationship in a little different way. I think U.S.-China relationship is one where cooperation, engagement, and competition goes side by side. Because I hope you are hearing me.
Please go ahead. We can hear you loud and clear. Dr. Shabbir, please go ahead.
Okay. So I was talking about the U.S.-China relationship has cooperation, competition, as well as competition and cooperation alongside. Now, when we look at there's a concept of corporate America, and now there's a concept of corporate China. So there's a lot of corporate interests have developed, over a period of time. And say, for example, the U.S. has exports to China that comes to nearly 9% of their total export. And similarly, China exports around 70%, 18% of what they export to the entire world. And there are 252 companies, Chinese companies, working in the United States. Now, look, this actually gives a strength to our thesis that corporate China and corporate America are actually collaborating. Yes, there are issues, balloon issue, there are tariff issues, there are competition. Like there's the issue of contentment, there's the issue of political influence. I think China, through their foresight, like for example, when I talk about China's contentment policy of China, of America, so China has now directly or indirectly engaged around more than 120 countries on Belt and Road Initiative. Now, they have active cooperation in terms of BRI with around 70 countries in the world. Now, the very concept of containing China, it dies when China is spreading all across the world and actually giving a hope of development, progress, win-win situation, common future, and poverty alleviation, and wishes to resolve the problems that the world is facing at last. So I think this meeting of both the heads of state will go a long way, because both the leaders and both the leadership of both the countries have shown interest that this relationship should be consolidated on very strong footing. Now, there are two important things for this. One is that it is important from perspective of China and the U.S. Themselves. Secondly, this rapprochement or the engagement or cooperation between the two countries is in the interest of global peace, because both are superpowers. China is rising very rapidly. China is actually competing in many fields like IT, AI, and technology, which is of course fair worry for the American policymakers. But I think they should find some kind of tool for engagement because it is in the interest of people of America and China as well as for the entire world, and particularly Pakistan, because we are actually, I think we are the one country who will be caught in a catch-22 situation because we have very good relations with China. We depend on China for many things. We have very good relations with the United States, and I think we hold both the relationship very important for our conducting our foreign policy in the world.
Right, Dr. Shabbir, as already Dr. Farah was of the view that one of the core reasons because the US feels threatened of China was because of the economic boom and the rise of China. Now, in your take, you've said, you've shed light as to what corporate America is, what corporate China is, and when it comes to corporate America and corporate China, it is more of collaboration between the two countries. Could you shed a little bit of more light that economic rise of China doesn't actually threaten the US, and there are other core reasons as to which from the US feels threatened from China?
When you talk to American scholars, there's a difference of opinion. Some scholars say that you need to have a competition with China, and many scholars, there are same voices in the American scholarship, and they say no, it is engagement, and America will gain more by cooperation, engagement with China than confrontation and competition. I think there is a very strong feeling in Washington D.C. About how to go about the relationship, but it is matter of creating influence syndrome across the region and the world. When I say influence syndrome, that means that Americans, they want India to be stronger, net security provider in the region against China, and similarly, China would also like to counter first India in the region, and then globally, where Americans are actually having interest colliding with Chinese interest. But I think Chinese have been more, forthcoming. The way the world tell the world, they send out a very nice message. Like they always talk of cooperation, they talk of shared future, shared destiny, common progress. They are not that they give a Chinese order, but they are actually for an order where all the countries, all the developing countries are going alongside, and their major problems like poverty, their progress, and their trade, their businesses are actually connected. And that is why Belt and Road Initiative, and for that matter CPEC, they are the projects which actually address the connectivity vision of Xi Jinping.
Right, Dr. Shabbir, BRI, in specific to that particular thing, how is it perceived in the US quarters when it comes to Chinese access to so many countries with this gigantic project of connectivity and alleviating poverty and bringing it more progress and prosperity?
No, the very foundation of Belt and Road Initiative is, it is with the aim of creating a world where you can connect with each other. Though it's an ambitious project, and the Western scholars call it a very, very ambitious venture of President Xi Jinping, but definitely Belt and Road Initiative is a project that will connect the world, three continents, and which will affect positively, which will impact lives of, around 4 billion people. So, and there have been, efforts to counter Belt and Road Initiative in the past, but I don't think so that any effort made by U.S. and its allies will make any headway because, Chinese have deliberated on these concepts, and they have requisite funds to support their ventures, and I think they think pragmatically. And if you just talk of Belt and Road Initiative Forum that held in China last year, it reflects that China has been able to convince the entire world that, look, we have a plan for the progress, we have a plan for development of the world, and you join us. And, many head of states and many heads of institutions, joined them in the Belt and Road Initiative Forum reflected that the world is, by and large, with their idea of Belt and Road Initiative and development of the world.
Right, Dr. Shabbir, please stay with us. Let me proceed once again to Dr. Fazal Rehman. Dr. Fazal Rehman, now, these sticking points, which have already been mentioned by both of our panelists, what is your understanding as to what are the major contentious points which have actually hit this bilateral relationship on a number of occasions, especially when we talk about the last year? Does it have to do more with the mutual trust deficit, or are there any other areas that we should actually look into?
Actually, definitely there is a trust deficit between the two because they are competing, and they are competing, sort of in a very strong manner. I would like to draw your attention towards the, sort of basics of this relationship, which is very complex, complicated, but at the same time, sort of the most important relationship. Chinese policy is engaging the world. It's basically, they want to continue with the process of globalization. They want to continue with the process of, making certain changes in the international governance system, international economic system, which suits the, global South. Whereas on the other side, the Americans, they would like to have, deglobalization. They would like to have decoupling, de-risking, and, all those things which would try to, really damage the global governance context and the structures. So I think there is a very larger and deep competition which is going on between these two entities, if we may say, and this is going to have global consequences. And, I would like to just state, the last interviews of Henry Kissinger, who is architect of US-China policy, and he said that, this is going to be catastrophic if this competition continues. So there has to be kind of competition and engagement at the same time, back and forth, but they have to accommodate each other. If they don't accommodate each other, it's going to be a global, sort of disaster. So I think that, sort of his predictions as far as the US-China relations are concerned, I really think, sort of they should be taken very seriously.
Right. The point that you've just mentioned about the American policy as far as China is concerned is more towards decoupling and de-globalization. That is quite in contrast to what the Chinese policy on the US is in particular, and also regarding the entire globe. Is this policy equally true for whatever the administration takes the reign of power in the US, whether they be Republicans or Democrats?
Well, absolutely. I think it's their national policy. It's their national approach. No matter who comes into the White House, he is going to pursue, the similar kind of policies, and which is largely dictated by their military establishment. So right. I think I don't see any, much change, with the change of administration in the US.
So per se, if we compare that China policy during the Trump administration towards China, and now the policy that Biden administration has actually pursued over the last 3 years necessarily, which one out of the two do you think was more based on trust deficit and was based on more ferocity of approach towards China?
I think Trump was largely, sort of trying to manipulate the local politics also. The local factor was also influencing, sort of his take on China. Whereas he was like, sort of more hostile towards China. Whereas Biden, he is at times, sort of playing to the lobby of the hostile, sort of quarters in the US, and at the same time he also tries to engage China, but in a very limited manner. So I don't really read too much into these kind of niceties, exchanging messages or meeting, and from the Chinese side there is a positive intent. There is very clear intent of engagement. They don't want any kind of conflict. They don't want any kind of confrontation, because China is a country which has long-term plans of their own development, of global development, and they see that with kind of a conflict and confrontation, all this is going to be affected, and there will be consequences.
Right, as Dr. Talat Shabbir has mentioned, there has been more of collaboration when it comes to corporate America and corporate China. The economic relationship between both the countries booming and increasing. So it shows that there is an interdependence when it comes to economic relationship between the two countries. Given that fact, when there is so much of independence between the two countries, when their economies are concerned, do you think they specifically when we talk about the American policy that you've already mentioned, would even the US be in a position to go in any sort of a bigger confrontation with China?
Well, actually, it's not necessary that they go in a direct confrontation with China. They can create certain kind of sort of environment which can hurt the Chinese national interest, especially on the issue of Taiwan. You have started from the beginning of this year. I would rather take you a little back into 2022 when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, and it created very sensitive and very kind of delicate situation for both the countries.
There were visits by the Taiwanese officials towards the US also later on in 2023 also.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a continuous provocation from the US side as far as China is concerned, and then they make sort of one step forward, and then they take two steps back. So I think they're not going anywhere in terms of, as far as economic engagement is concerned. Definitely both the countries have deep interest, and that is going to continue. But this is the real politics in terms of sort of having global strategic influence and safeguarding their interest in global governance and global economic system. So I think that is something which is at stake. As far as the normal corporation to corporation relationship or other, it's a continuous sort of business ordinary.
Right. Dr. Farah, what's your understanding when we compare the kind of policy under the Trump administration as compared to the policy under the Biden administration towards China? How do you analyze that? Which one do you think had been more full of hard stance, or do you see no difference between the policies under the both administrations?
Well, if you look into the previous term of President Trump, we have seen that he has been a bit very vocal on in terms of certain areas, but he has never ever picked any sort of heated conflict or heated argument with any state in terms of diplomatic relationship between the two countries. So I don't see President Trump posing some kind of, a serious kind of issue towards China. And we can also see the way President Trump has served. He is not a person who wants to get engaged into conflict. He's a business-minded person, and he believes in business. So to me, to my basic understanding, China and Trump, they can get along very easily because China believes in business and Trump believes in business. So this is where they can integrate. Speaking about another thing that you were discussing a while ago, we need to see how China and how America is functioning at this point in time. We need to see when there is any sort of crisis in the world. Of course, all states are not economically empowered enough. They need help and support from the world powerful states like China, like United States, and like all other countries. So since the Bretton Woods system and the agreement that was introduced, since then, IMF and the World Bank program, United States through these two programs is helping in some kind of financing to the countries who are in need. But China does not believe in such kind of, giving away money and then putting some restrictions in terms of high utility bills or some kind of taxes and all of that. China believe in pure business. They says, okay, if you really need my help, let's have a business together. You also earn something out of that, and I will also earn something out of that. So China believes in empowering the states. China believes in making the states to be sufficient enough to deal with the problems themselves, rather than the states then they rely on China altogether. So this is a complete demarcation between the two countries and their policies, the way they look into the third world countries and the way they look into other countries and the diplomatic relationship between China or other parts of the world. This is completely different from one another. So we can see who is more hostile, who is more kind of passive towards having good engagement with other countries. The demarcation is quite obvious.
Right. So when we talk about when you talk about this particular demarcation, who happens to be more hostile? Now, if we specifically, if you mean to say that it is the U.S., if we understand it is more hostile, and China being more ready to engage on various fronts with the U.S. So does this hostility actually serve the interests of the U.S. in the longer run and for its people?
Well, for that to understand why United States is very aggressive towards the world and its policies, and why it's all the time into the war gaming and all of that, We need to see what sort of business they're offering to the world. They're making money through their the war complex that they have established, the military complex that they are having. So they want to have any sort of war in the world through which they can make money out of that. This is their major business, right? So from that they can make money, they can run their finances, they can manage their entire economic system. But when we look at China, of course, they're also working on their military might. Military might is one of the major pillars of power. But China, along with that, also wants to establish businesses with the world as well, where they want to set some kind of connections with the world through which the other countries can also earn. But China also keep its own margin very high in that. I'm not saying that China is doing it in charity. No, not at all. But the thing here is who is getting benefit through aggressive policies. The United States is having aggressive policies because of the business, the nature of the business that they are holding in the bag. And China is a bit passive in its approach towards its policies because the businesses that China is offering is completely different, right? So that's the major reason which is shaping their policies towards one another as well and towards the world as well.
Right, let me proceed towards Dr. Shabbir. Dr. Shabbir, what's your understanding? Which are out of the two, the Republicans or the Democrats, or the policy towards China when we compare as to the Trump administration as to what has been during the Biden administration? How do you compare the two?
Jawad, I think when we talk of administrations, we saw that during Trump administration there was a lot of confrontation and there was a lot of competition, initiated by President Trump's various statements that he would quite often give in the media or maybe in the public discourse. Now, Biden somewhat looks very docile and engaging, if you will. But one thing I would like to mention that, as a student of international relations, one thing is common since ancient ages, and that is power. All the states would like to grab power to remain influential. So if looking at from the prism of power grabbing or influence, grabbing, so this competition will continue. This will continue because the Americans will like to stay where they are. The Chinese would like to replace. But there is a difference between approaches towards like China is very docile. China is very engaging. It's very forthcoming. The demeanor of Chinese leadership shows that they are actually trying to create a world where all cooperate, all connect, all do business together, all do for the welfare and good of human beings in their countries, the people of their countries. This is a very common phenomena that, America was in war for the last 50 years, or more than 50 years. China was into economy for the last 50 years. So no, that actually shows what priority both countries have. Of course, when we talk of setting priorities, it's not only president, it is, continuation of policies. The State Department, the establishment, military establishment also is a word to, contribute. So, but by and large, when you look at the way America was running the world, it was little, aggressive. It was really bold, and it was really somewhat inward kind of policies that they would say, it's America first, or But Chinese are there to engage the entire world. So you just imagine that now 3 initiatives that they have just unleashed, like Global Development Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative, Global Security Initiative. Now these initiatives, they look at the concepts of these initiatives. So China actually wants a world which is secure, safe, and which is connected, which is for the well-being of people. It talks of, when they talk of Global Development Initiative, they talk of world development. So I think there's a fundamental difference between the approaches of both the leadership of both the countries. And in my view, China is engaging, whereas the still hawks in American policy circle, they dominate somewhere, and they, sometimes they create a situation where, Chinese are also compelled or constrained or forced to react. But I think China, as their state behavior suggests, they will continue to engage. They will continue to work for economy. They will continue to work for the development of the world. They will continue to do connectivity and business and trade with the developing world.
Does this approach of the US in particular serve to the interests of its people?
I don't think so, because in the long run, when I talk to American scholars coming to Pakistan, or I have been to America in a think tank, when I used to talk to them about policies, they would say, we Americans would like to be loved by the world. We Americans would like to be appreciated by the world. We are a big country, we are a big nation, we need to help the world, but I think things are not going in that direction. I think their public opinion has, these factor in that you have to be, for example, I quote that the major difference between American foreign policy towards developing world, particularly Pakistan, has been of arm twisting, trying to coerce on various policies. Whereas Chinese were always accommodative. Chinese would also would always understand our vulnerabilities, our problems. They would understand our issues and problems, and they would accommodate in their foreign policy. So this is the difference. This is the fundamental difference between China and the U.S. I think there's a lot of scholarship in the U.S. also who are pushing America to be engaging, to go on cooperative mode. Many scholars think that you can take advantage of China's development, China's rise, and you can also but there are still people who are very hawkish in their approach, and sometimes I sense that those hawkish people dominate the policy circle.
Right, please stay with us, Dr. Talat Shabbir. Dr. Fazal Rehman, when it comes to upholding or ensuring global peace and security, out of these two, which one do you think champion this particular cause in terms of concrete measures? For example, when we talk about peace mediation, we've seen the example on the part of the Chinese when it came to the Saudi and Iran rapprochement. Then we saw that they also presented 12-point peace proposal as far as the Ukraine conflict was concerned. Now, when we talk about the Gaza conflict, the issue that we have been facing over the last 2 months now, the Israeli bombardment, relentless, indiscriminate, disproportionate use of force, despite the repeated calls by the international community, it was the US which actually vetoed a number of resolutions at the United Nations Security Council. Your understanding of this entire equation?
Well, I think that the divide in the world in international politics has been more sharp, and it has become more clearer. On the one side, the champions of democracy, human rights, they are violating the human rights. They are not allowing people even to have the right to live. They are denying that right, to the children and women. On the other side, they are trying to, sort of accuse other countries for not respecting the value of democracy and human rights and other things. So I think this dichotomy in kind of the approach towards global issues based on your own interest is not going to work. That has not been really accepted by international community in any positive manner. Whereas the Chinese side has been trying to help people, trying to diffuse tensions globally through the Global Security Initiative, and Global Development Initiative, trying to make different civilizations, to live in more harmony and things like that. So this is a different contrast of approach. But the thing is that, the kind of exploitation which the West has been doing in the last 400 years of the underdeveloped world, and through all these institutions which have been, sort of controlling the global finances, I think this is going to be, this has been challenged. And the major issue with the West and the Americans is that the challenging power has the capacity really to establish kind of a system or kind of a ideological values which are based on basically on the interest of the developing countries. So that is something sort of they feel that sort of they are losing grip over the international
where happens to be the question of accountability. For example, we talk about, as you mentioned, that they had been exploiting the developing countries over the last 400 years as well. Now this particular phenomenon has been challenged with the rise of China, giving them the alternatives on so many fronts. Now, also talking about ensuring and upholding peace and security around the globe, being democracy, while also allowing the violation of human rights at an equal scale. So we have also seen the United Nations not fulfilling its obligations when it came to the role of the United Nations Security Council. So the question arises, to this sort of a democracy, who is going to be accountable? Do you think the people from within the US, the voice which is used for electing those representatives who actually run these policies, are they in a position to hold their representatives accountable if, per se, even the United Nations Security Council or the United Nations as the world organization couldn't even do that?
Well, actually, their representatives are, largely reflecting the aspirations of the people. They are the representatives, what the people would like to, convey. So there is, there have been a lot of demonstrations, there have been a lot of opposition, throughout the world, especially in the US also, in Europe also. But I think that, those kind of pressures will not really work to make certain kind of adjustment in their policies. So I think their policies are going to remain the same. They will become more indifferent to the people's opinion, people's views and all that. Although they have to depend on their votes in order to get elected.
Right. Your last quick comments regarding as to any sort of a shift in the U.S. policy, specifically towards China, after the presidential elections are held over there, and whichever candidate gets elected, whether it's Joe Biden getting re-elected or whether it comes to former President Trump, whether he gets re-elected, do you see any sort of a shift after that presidential election?
Personally, I think that the American policies, which they have been following for the last 7-8 years, have been so deeply entrenched into kind of operational cycle that it will be very difficult for them to really retreat from those policies, their position. So I think that I don't see much of a difference in the US policy in the coming
so by a large view of the view, it's going to be sustainable on the same pattern, the same line,
almost the same ups and downs, it will continue, which is known like engagement and confrontation, which will go side by side.
Let me take Dr. Farah's view on this particular. Dr. Farah, do you also expect the same as Dr. Fazal Rehman expects after even the presidential elections due in 2024 in the US, or do you expect any sort of a shift in the policy towards China?
Well, I think there is a lot of realization among the American citizens, and they are demanding their leadership to change their policies. And whatever they have done in the Middle East, probably that has been a triggering point for the citizens of United States to realize what their state leadership is doing to the people in the world, and to them in particular as well, because they are facing lots of economic problems and the challenges are getting bigger and bigger. So I think they may not sustain with the existing policy 100%. There will be a slight change in their approach towards how to deal with the world. And probably they also have to move back from the war strategy that they are all the time on it, based on their business complex that they are holding on to. And secondly, they are...
Dr. Naz, they have to, you're of the opinion that they have to move away from the war strategy. But would they? Especially given the fact the Biden administration has bypassed Congress twice within less than a month for an arms sale to Israel.
Exactly. And it's not only about supporting Israel in its war against Gaza, it's the Ukraine conflict as well, where if you remember recently, there was a lot of problem happening in the Republicans, where there was a talk about that they cannot technically provide economic support to the Ukraine to support the war, but they had to provide that. And probably that's the reason that they are now actively engaged in Gaza to take the Ukrainian side away from the general public and their attention. So can they really move back from the war strategies? It's a bit difficult for them. I said they are making money out of war. If you just go and double check in the world wars, has America ever fought a war by itself? No. It always needs other alliances to group together and to wage that war for America. And then when it's a victory, America says America won this war. So the credit goes to America, but all other alliances who are partners with the United States, they are fighting the war for America. So there's a huge thing. So the cost that America is getting from the war is a bit in controlled numbers because they're making money, and they are also letting other soldiers and all the other troops to die for the American war. So the cost is not that big for America. That's why they may not move from the war strategy. They'll keep changing their way and approaching and changing their location in times to come.
Okay, Dr. Shabbir, what's your understanding? Do you expect any sort of a shift happening after the presidential elections are held in 2024, or do you expect the same sort of policy towards China? Dr. Shabbir, can you hear me, please? I think unfortunately we lost the connection with Dr. Talat Shabbir, Director at China-Pakistan Study Center at ISSI, joining us on the phone line, and also Dr. Farah, Foreign Affairs expert, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. In the studio, we were honored to have been joined by Dr. Fazal Rehman, Executive Director of the Pakistan Council in China. Dr. Fazal Rehman, thank you very much for your taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Look forward to having another enlightening discussion with you in another show, perhaps very soon. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.